Hi, squad. Welcome back to Crime Squad Podcast with me, your host, Natasha. It's that time of the week again. And yes, I know this episode is late, but I do have a legitimate reason. I'm trying something new. I've started a Crime Squad podcast TikTok and I've released some videos featuring missing persons in Canada. I plan to post one of these every Monday using the hashtag Missing Monday to get the word out. If you feel like you have any tips, you can contact Crime Stoppers at 1-888-222-8477. You can also use the contact information found in each individual video description. This is why I'm releasing today's episode today instead of on Friday of last week. Keep listening and you'll see why. To begin my research for Missing Monday, I searched Missing Persons Canada on the internet, and I was honestly shocked at how many people came up. So many lost souls, so many unanswered questions. I could spend hours and hours looking at each individual, reading their story. Sometimes there's nothing more available on their disappearances than what is captured in the profile on the site seeking to help solve the mystery. There are many websites out there, such as canadasmissing.ca, as well as various RCMP or local police websites. Those of you who have been part of the squad since the beginning may recall a few episodes about this topic, and you'll know how I feel about missing persons cases. They absolutely baffle me. Something deep within me is very frightened at the thought of people who seemingly vanish without a trace. In episode 13, I explore the cases of Dana Zellick and Dean Curtis Mortensen, both of whom were there 1 minute and then gone. The cases have long since gone cold. Episode 7 features missing and murdered Indigenous women. There just seems to be no shortage of missing persons to cover. Sometimes these people are found, but it's not usually a happy thing. There are still more questions than answers in many of those situations. Today's case is going to be about the missing persons currently in London, Ontario. Unfortunately, many of these cases have such limited information available, so the details in this episode may seem a little bit scarce. Let's get into today's episode. Over the last 5 years, specifically 2018 to 2022, 32,000 adults on average have gone missing each year. That's just in Canada. What happened to these individuals? Well, as of 2022, the numbers break down as follows: 49 people abducted by a stranger, 51 ended up being in an accident of some kind, 3,012 simply wandered off. This specific statistic I don't really understand, but approximately 30 individuals were parental or relative abductions. 5,060 were runaways. 30, or just simply presumed dead. 19 were victims of human trafficking. And lastly, 25,500 are labeled as other or unknown. Interestingly, 57% of adults reported missing in 2022 were males, and 64% of the adults who simply wandered off in 2022 were males. So it seems to be a little bit more on the male-heavy side. And I'm sure, squad, you know the statistics regarding Indigenous individuals in our country. They are at such higher rates of going missing or being murdered. In 2022, 13% of all missing adults were Indigenous, and 62% of those were Indigenous females. These are only adult statistics, but you better believe there are statistics involving missing children as well. But for our purposes, I'll focus on the adult stats in this episode. A lot of the high-profile missing persons cases are shrouded in mystery, which of course causes people to speculate. I've been guilty myself of getting into YouTube icebergs or conspiracy theories regarding missing people. There's everything from UFO abductions to government cover-ups and so much more. These types of stories prove time and time again why closure is so necessary where trauma is concerned. When left to its own devices, the human mind can construct all kinds of scenarios and outcomes strictly using imagination. As I mentioned, all of the individuals we're covering in today's episode have gone missing in London, Ontario, or have at least ties to London, Ontario. If you have any information about anything you hear in this episode, please contact London Police Service via phone at the non-emergency line, which is 519-661-5670. You can also submit a report online, or you can contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-5477. Crime Stoppers is anonymous. Alexander Macaulay has been missing since 2002. Aside from the London Police website, there is almost nothing available on this case. All we know is this. On July 2nd, 2002, London Police executed a search warrant at Alexander's home located on Dundas Street. Dundas is a long street, for those of you who aren't living in London. So there's no further information on why the search warrant was issued or the location of the residence. Now, Dundas is known for being kind of sketchy, depending on the closest intersection. I live off Dundas, and I've never had a problem personally, but there is usually a heavy police presence in the area. Whatever police found in Alexander's home as a result of the search warrant was enough to charge him, although nothing was released regarding what the charges were. Now, Alexander wasn't actually at his residence when police arrived with the search warrant in hand, so an additional warrant was issued for his arrest. A warrant that has yet to be fulfilled, because Alexander is missing. According to London Police Service, following the search of his home, Alexander reached out to a family member who has not been publicly identified. He admitted to the family member he was wanted by police. Oddly enough, Alexander hasn't been seen or heard from since this phone call. And remember, the search warrant and arrest warrant were issued in 2002. Despite this, it wasn't until 8 years later that Alexander's family filed a missing persons report with police. So right away, I have so many questions. What were police searching for at Alexander's house? What were the circumstances that led to police obtaining a search warrant? Is Alexander known to police? And also, if he contacted a family member, did that family member provide means for Alexander to flee? Is that why his family didn't report him missing for another 8 years? Unfortunately, this case has grown completely cold. There is no information I can gather, at least nothing publicly shared. And I dug deep in the archives, folks. Perhaps one day the family will have closure, but for now, the disappearance of Alexander Macaulay remains a mystery. At the time he went missing, Alexander Macaulay stood at 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed approximately 150 pounds. He has brown eyes and brown hair. Bradley Allen Taylor was born August 29, 1964. In 2009, he was visiting London, Ontario, and when his visit was over in early January, he began his journey home to Enfield, Nova Scotia. The drive is around 1,950 kilometers, and it would take around 19 hours to complete. Around 5.5 hours into the drive, Bradley stopped in Brockville, Ontario to take a break and get some rest. He checked in to the Travelodge Motel and checked out the next morning, the morning of January 10th, 2009. 2 hours from Brockville in Roussillon, Quebec, Bradley's car was found abandoned at a railway crossing. Upon inspection of the vehicle, Roussillon police determined that many of Bradley's personal belongings were found in the car. They searched the area, but Bradley was nowhere to be found. A few facts are definitely missing here, specifically how police were notified of the vehicle sitting by the tracks, as well as what personal belongings were found. I tried to look up Roussillon, Quebec, missing persons, but Bradley isn't listed on any of the sites from Roussillon Police Department to Montreal Police Department. The police in Quebec contacted Bradley's family in London, who then reported Bradley missing to London Police Service. Another search, this time more extensive than the initial attempt, occurred in Roussillon and a media release was issued. The family also had flyers drawn up and released in the area, but Bradley is still missing. In my mind, so many things could have happened here. Bradley may not have even gone missing in Quebec. It's possible that he was targeted in Brockville. It may not have even been Bradley who drove the car to Roussillon. I would hope the investigation included searching from Brockville to Quebec, but there are no details listed about this potential scenario. At the time he went missing, Bradley stood 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighed around 205 pounds. He is a white male and has brown hair and blue eyes. According to the website WebSleuths, Bradley has several distinguishing features, specifically visibly missing teeth, a deformity on the thumb on his right hand, and he also wears eyeglasses. Apparently, he also went by the alias Joe Strummer, perhaps after the band member in The Clash. Sadly, that's all the information that we have about Bradley. Someone out there knows something. I hope somebody comes forward so the family can have closure. Trevor John Andrews was born August 8, 1983. He lived in London, Ontario, specifically in the Huron Heights neighborhood. His sister, Kelly, has fond memories of her little brother and clearly misses him so much. Growing up, Trevor was an introverted kid who liked to watch TV and play video games. He also loved music, specifically rap and hip-hop. He could be sociable in situations that called for it, despite his introversive nature. This guy very much sounds like me at my core, so I'm sure if we knew each other in life, we probably would have been friends. Unfortunately, Trevor's life took a turn when he began experimenting with drugs. He also earned a bit of a rap sheet stemming from incidents occurring with his ex-girlfriend, who was also the mother of his young child. I don't really have details on what that's about, but it was mentioned in one of the articles, so I'm including it here. Despite Trevor abusing substances, he wanted to see his son regularly, and he wanted to be able to have more access to his son. He was working at getting a lawyer to help him through custody discussions and was also getting counseling. At the time of his disappearance, he was living with his father, who apparently also struggled with substance use issues. Trevor was keen on getting his own apartment, and he had plans to look at a unit in late October of 2009. And though decisions Trevor made led him to dropping out of high school, he had recently been planning on getting his high school equivalency. There's something to be said about someone experiencing addiction that still manages to stay in contact with family. And obviously staying in contact too for reasons outside of wanting to try and get funds to further substance use issues. But I know something about this because in the years of my active addiction, I actually avoided my family as much as possible because the person I was when I was abusing drugs was not someone I wanted to subject my family to. And so I avoided this at all costs. I was, for the most part, not really present, and I didn't often check in to show that I was okay. Although the family was experiencing strain, Trevor still wanted to make sure they knew he was safe. He would call his family frequently, usually around the small hours of the morning, and would make sure they knew he was alive and safe. Sometimes he would leave funny voicemails. He ultimately didn't want his family to worry, as they were very much aware of his lifestyle and they obviously didn't approve. But they still loved Trevor unconditionally. One can only hope to have family like that. On the evening of October 28, 2009, Trevor left a friend's house around 11:30 that night to head home to the apartment he shared with his father, Rick. He was trying to catch the 21 Huron Heights bus from the area of Oakville and Tulipe Streets. Trevor has never been heard from since that day. His family didn't receive any calls to let them know he was okay. He didn't get to have more visits with his son. He didn't get his own apartment or get to go back to school. He was simply gone without a trace. Trevor's family did report him missing, but it took London Police Service 11 days to issue a missing persons bulletin to the public. I'm unsure of why this was the case. Perhaps Trevor was known to police due to his criminal history. In the meantime, the family did everything they could to locate Trevor. They began by searching nearby woods and streets. They printed missing persons posters and distributed them throughout the city. The days continued to pass by, then weeks, then years. Here we are, 15 years later, and seemingly this case has long since gone cold. Sister Kelly recalls the gut feeling she had when Trevor was confirmed missing. She felt in her heart that Trevor had been killed. At the time of his disappearance, Trevor was a 26-year-old white male with green eyes and short brown hair. He stood 6 feet tall and weighed 170 pounds and was considered to have a slender build. He has a red birthmark on his left cheek. The sex trade. It's definitely an interesting topic, and it can be very triggering for some people. It's like the best kept secret of many. Purists, or those of a conservative viewpoint, often look down on those who earn their way in life by means of the sex trade. Maybe a lot of us actually have preconceived notions about this type of work where we too judge a person harshly and deem them shameful or disgusting. I am very liberal with my views on sex work. I really don't see anything wrong with a person choosing this as a means to earn money. I do have issues, though, with the fact that a lot of people who are in this area of work seem to feel like they don't have another alternative, are possibly addicted to substances, or forced into this trade due to sex trafficking. The trade of sex for money or commodities is probably one of the oldest professions in the world. It's unfortunate there is such a stigma surrounding it. And the violence. There is so much violence perpetrated against sex workers. To many, there's an assumption that people just won't care if they go missing. Society tends to view sex workers as less than. They are the forgotten ones, the fuck-ups, the people who should have made better life choices. There are people, however, that do choose this as their line of work. And even for those who don't choose it, they aren't less than anyone else. Nobody deserves to be made to feel inferior. And let's look at the reality for a second. Clearly, demand for this type of service is large because there are a lot of women and men out there offering such services. Logic would dictate there are people who are willing to pay. From what I know from a few people who have been or are in the industry, it can actually be a very lucrative opportunity to make great money. This brings us to the next two people in this episode, both of whom were sex workers in London, Ontario. Catherine Bordato was born April 2nd, 1966. Not much is known of her life prior to her disappearance. However, an interesting fact about Catherine was that she was a track athlete in her youth and actually set school records in Leamington, Ontario due to her ability in the sport. At some point, Catherine's life went down a path of instability. She had 2 children, a son and daughter, and tried to be a good mother to her children. Her son recalls Catherine as being always on the go, always with new boyfriends, and moving house to house. The family always had a roof over their heads, but it wasn't always in a conventional sense. Sometimes that roof was a woman's shelter with their mother. Sometimes it was temporary foster care. Stability was offered to Catherine's son when his grandmother took him in. Catherine continued to live what is considered a high-risk lifestyle involving drug use. Her son recalls that Catherine often kept the drug abuse from her children, trying to shield them from that lifestyle. Catherine began to work in the London, Ontario sex trade scene, trying to earn money however she could. Because Catherine was in active addiction, it took the family several months to realize that something wasn't right and that she was missing. Although the missing persons report was filed in February of 2010, Catherine's last known sighting, according to London Police, was August of 2009 in the area of Cavendish Park near Walnut Street. The area was searched by police and people in the area were questioned, but police did not seem to gain any leads from this attempt. They believe there are people out there who have more information and have not come forward. In February of 2010, when Catherine had been reported missing, someone in the west end of the city, specifically in the Westmount area, came forward to police indicating her husband had seen a female that appeared to be Catherine Bordato. She was seen with their neighbor. Police arrived on scene as a result of this tip and reportedly spent 2 days gathering evidence at a residence. London Constable Amy Filippo was quoted by the London Free Press as saying, quote, "We seized items in relation to the missing persons investigation," end quote. Police, however, never confirmed if the resident of the townhome they searched was a confirmed link to Catherine Bordato, and no further news was published regarding this particular lead or what the evidence seized was. At the time of her disappearance, Catherine was 43 years old. That would make her 58 years old this year. She's a white female with long brown hair and brown eyes. She's approximately 5'4" tall and weighed around 140 pounds in 2009 when she was last seen. Distinguishing marks include a tattoo of the Venus symbol on her left hand between her thumb and index finger. She had her belly button, both ears, and her eyebrow pierced. She also has known aliases, the names of which are Kathy, Pat, Kat, Katie, Katie Stewart, Laura Bordato, and Laura Stewart. It's been 15 years since Catherine vanished without a trace. If you have information, please do the right thing and come forward. You can remain anonymous by contacting Crime Stoppers, or you can contact the London Police Service directly. Someone out there knows something. Be the person who chooses to do the right thing. The next missing female is Shelley Joy DeRoche. Shelley, like Catherine Bordato, lived what police would consider to be a high-risk lifestyle. Born on February 4th, 1974, Shelley unfortunately suffered a lot of hardship and trauma from a young age. She grew up with an abusive parent and as a result would repeatedly spend time in various foster homes starting at a young age. Shelley would eventually spend more and more time on the streets and began an addictive relationship with drugs. Like so many in the same position, in order to support her habit, Shelley worked as a sex worker. But more than that, Shelley was a loving sister, a loving mother, and as of 2016, had become a recent grandmother. Shelley was a great friend to many. According to her sister, Laura DeRoche, Shelley loved Springbank Park and would often unwind there, either walking or rollerblading. And despite Shelley's battles with addiction, she's described as being a very joyful, friendly, supportive, and caring person who had hobbies like watching movies, cooking, reading, and photography. She always tries to find the bright side of life, no matter her situation. She had been trying to get out of active addiction and had to stay at a rehab facility that unfortunately wasn't successful. Now, there is a podcast about Shelley and her disappearance. It's called Finding Shelley DeRoche, and I found it on Spotify. The podcast was created by Carla Stevens Tolstoy, and I look forward to listening to it to get a better understanding of what Shelley's life was like, as well as a breakdown of the evidence found. It was released in 2017, and according to an article in the Toronto Sun, it angered many of Shelley's friends and family, widening a divide that was already in place due to her disappearance. I'm not sure why that is, so that's why I'm going to give a listen, and hopefully you will too. The facts of Shelley's disappearance are as follows. She was last seen in the area of Lorne Avenue and English Street in London's East End. Apparently, the last person to see her was a police officer on the date of January 2nd, 2016. Leading up to this date, on December 31st, 2015, Shelley and her sister Laura had a visit, and Laura cannot recall anything out of the ordinary. Shelley DeRoche is a white female, approximately 5'2". At the time of her disappearance, she weighed 130 pounds and had dark blonde hair and hazel brown eyes. In terms of notable identifiers, Shelley walked with one foot pointed inwards, like a pigeon toe walk is what it's called. Shelley also has several tattoos. There's a tiny bluebird on one of her shoulders, and on the other shoulder is a heart with a rose. On the back of her shoulders, there's a tattoo of a whale with the word Kevin tattooed across. Over the years, police have received hundreds of tips, but sadly, these tips haven't been enough to solve the case. Police did, however, recover Shelley's purse in a home that is known for being a hub of heavy drug-related activity. And 3 years after Shelley went missing, her health card was found in the parking lot of a walk-in clinic on Hamilton Road. Throughout the course of the investigation into both Shelley and Catherine, police identified one person as knowing both of the women. This individual became a person of interest because of the limited cooperation with investigating officers. There is also evidence that this person withheld information from the police. All of this was further investigated, and apparently over a long period of time, so that police could try to obtain the information that this particular individual had. And apparently it was enough for police to monitor this person very closely in the interest of public safety. Right there, that tells me there is significance to this person. My mind asks, is it a client? Was it a client of Shelley and Catherine's? Did he actually end their lives? Unfortunately, the investigation has come to a halt because the person of interest has died. This essentially stalled any further investigation, and it actually seemed like it was going to be a promising lead. Police also will not release the name of the suspect, which is something to do with privacy laws in Canada when somebody is deceased. If you have any information at all about either Shelley Desrochers or Catherine Bordato, please come forward to police. Do the right thing. Ryan Richard Doherty has not been seen since December of 2009. It was December 24th, to be exact, when Ryan was seen by his family in London, Ontario. He was reportedly in contact with friends the last week of December 2019, but hadn't been heard from since. There were also reports that he'd been seen in Woodstock in the area of late December 2019. It wasn't until March 6th of the year 2020 that Ryan was reported missing. After returning from a trip abroad, Ryan's mother noticed he had not picked up checks from her residence while she was away. This was uncharacteristic of Ryan. The alarm bells went off and a missing persons report was filed. Ryan's lifestyle meant he could sometimes lose touch with family. Time would go by, sometimes a lengthy period of time, before he would reach out and check in. This time, though, it feels different. His family is concerned for his welfare and wants to know that he is out there safe. Hopefully, they do not have to face the other scenario, which could be that Ryan is deceased. There is very little information available on this missing individual, and there are many questions I have. For instance, why was it common for Ryan to be out of touch? What was the lifestyle? Could this have something to do with his disappearance? Did he live a high-risk lifestyle? And if so, are there suspects in his disappearance? How is Ryan getting around? Did he have a vehicle? If so, what was the vehicle? Has it been located? There have been no updates on this case that have been made publicly available. This March 6th, Ryan will have been out of contact for 4 years. Where is Ryan Doherty? Ryan is a white male standing at about 5'10" and would now be in his 46th year. He has hazel eyes, and at the time he was last seen, his black hair was worn in a brush cut. He weighed 160 pounds at that time. Distinguishing marks include multiple scars, 3 on his left arm and 1 on his right hand. He also has multiple tattoos. On his right wrist, he has the word eternal. He has the word greed on his neck. On his right forearm, he has the word Citizen A. He has a tattoo of Pennywise the Clown from the Stephen King book and movie It on his chest. On his upper back is the word Eazy-E with a gun and a bullet. Left wrist, the numbers 09-05-76 with 6 eyes inside a triangle. The back of his neck has a skull. Left hand is a heart with the name Jody spelled Jodi, and on his right arm is a marijuana leaf. If you have any information, please come forward and allow Ryan's family to stop feeling like they're in the dark about their loved one. Gonzalo Ruby is the final individual covered on today's episode. This is the most recent missing person recorded in London, Ontario, and it's the person I featured on my TikTok Missing Monday video. On January 14th, 2022, London Police Service put out a bulletin seeking the public's assistance in locating a 49-year-old man who was reported missing. In the release were 2 photographs. One of them showed a Hispanic male who seems to be in good health. He sports dark sunglasses, a stylish t-shirt, and has some kind of bag slung over his shoulder, maybe a camera bag or a fanny pack. His lips have a hint of a smile, and the backdrop is a beautiful beach scene. The other photograph shows a man nearly unrecognizable in comparison to the first picture. His skin appears very pale, his cheeks gaunt. He isn't smiling, even a little bit. He has what appears to be a gash or wound on his forehead. I'll be posting pictures of all these individuals on social media, so be sure to follow so you can share the post to get the word out as far as possible, because we all know social media is a powerful tool. Admittedly, I was shocked to see the change in Gonzalo's appearance. Although the photos aren't dated, the change is so vast, and I can only speculate what changed in Gonzalo's life. To me, he appears to have suffered some kind of hardship, potentially even falling victim to drug use. Again, none of this has been confirmed, it's just my own inferences. Now, as I was doing my sleuthing around, I found a Facebook page for Achalo Ruby, and it's definitely the same person. There are tons of pictures on the Facebook page, and a lot of posts about Gonzalo's religious nature. The photographs of him looking happy and healthy are dated extremely recently, so to compare it against the photographs police released, it's clear Gonzalo appears to be in distress. According to the initial police brief, Gonzalo was last seen on December 26, 2021 in the area of Allen Avenue and Spruce Street. He was officially reported missing on January 13, 2022, because friends and family were concerned for his welfare, having not heard from him. Police indicated Gonzalo might have had possession of a silver Nissan sedan at the time of his disappearance. Facebook posts pleading for information have comments from Gonzalo's family members, notably his niece and brother, who were very concerned by the second picture that I keep referring to. A person commented that the family is worried sick and the disappearance of Gonzalo is extremely suspicious. They also note that the photograph of him looks physically wounded and in distress. What happened to Gonzalo? Why the marked change in appearance? Was he being held hostage somewhere? If so, for what purpose? There are just so many questions. Police issued an update on January 18, 2022, indicating that Gonzalo was still missing and also that his car had been found at the Hamilton and Clark Road area on January 15, 2022. The vehicle was found empty with no trace of Gonzalo in the area. If you know this area, you know it's made up of some residential houses, a variety store, a small used car lot, and the rest is mostly open area. There's also a recreational center, like where people can play soccer and things like that. But it is, in my opinion, an odd place to find an abandoned car. The days turned into weeks, turned into a couple months, and March 28th, 2022, London police put out another update. Gonzalo still had not turned up. I cannot even begin to imagine what this would feel like. Honestly, if a loved one went missing, it would be pure torture for me, especially if I had last seen them as a healthy individual doing okay, and then photographs released showed someone who was hard to recognize and clearly in distress. In the third update, police released a photograph of Gonzalo alone in what appeared to be the lobby of a bank, specifically at an ATM. They also released photographs of another person in the same lobby, presumably alone, and the person clearly looks like they have something to hide. They're wearing a black hooded sweatshirt with the hood pulled up to mask any hair and black sweatpants. It's super obvious the person doesn't want to be seen, especially because they're also wearing a black medical mask covering the majority of their face, as well as large framed black sunglasses. When they released the photos, police confirmed the person to be a female who may have information regarding Gonzalo's disappearance, and they made it clear they wanted to speak to her. She has yet to be identified or to come forward herself with information. The difficulty lies, of course, in the fact that wearing all black clothing masks any distinguishing features, and the mask and sunglasses completely disguise the face shape, eye shape, hair, color, length. Virtually anything that could give away her identity is blacked out. I wish there were more details released about this case. It's coming up on 2 years since Gonzalo seemingly vanished, and there's been no further media coverage or updates released. All I can do is speculate based on my knowledge of the city and the area he was last seen, and it isn't looking good for him. What I'd like to know is, when was the last time he spoke to his family, and what was his demeanor like? What was he doing in London? Because it appears most of his family resides in the United States or Cuba, where he's actually from. Was he here for work? Personal reasons? What area of the city did he live in? Did he have any relationships with friends or some kind of a spouse in London? What did Gonzalo do in his spare time? Why were photographs of Gonzalo at what appeared to be a drive-through ATM in the White Oaks area, specifically Ernest and Bradley, released? Was this the last time he was seen before he disappeared? And why were photographs later released of Gonzalo at a bank machine, followed by a picture of a female in suspicious clothing at that very same ATM? My gut feeling is that this female's photo was released because she was withdrawing funds from Gonzalo's bank account. If police investigated banking activity, which they generally would do in a case where people go missing, they would have been able to grab images that the ATM took of people who actually withdrew funds or made transactions on that specific account. The security measure of surveillance photos from ATMs is in place for situations where customers report fraudulent ATM use. What I'd like to know is the date and timestamp of each photograph, both the unknown female and Gonzalo's photos. And regarding the ATM at Ernest and Bradley, that's the photograph of Gonzalo in a vehicle, leaning out of the driver's seat. Ernest and Bradley isn't particularly close to where Gonzalo was last seen. It's around 12 kilometers away. Why these specific locations, though? Did he live in White Oaks, or did he live in the East End near the streets he was last seen? When he was last seen, was he on foot or was he in his vehicle? I know the area of Spruce and Allen fairly well. I go to the community center just steps away with my sons for sports and swimming. The area he was last seen also backs onto a rather large park, which is called the Kiwanis Park. And it's a very large acreage of green space and walking trails, including a ravine. The Kiwanis Park Facebook page clocks the park at 34 acres. The woods are extensive, stretching through multiple neighborhoods. I've hiked quite a few of the trails and have frequented the Pottersburg Dog Park on many occasions. How extensively was Kiwanis Park searched at the time of Gonzalo going missing? Can police rule out foul play? Can they rule out there won't be any clues to find in Kiwanis Park? What's interesting to me, too, about these specific locations, and I'm talking about Spruce and Allen and then Clark and Hamilton, where, as a reminder, Gonzalo's abandoned car was located, is that they're really not far from each other at all. And Kiwanis Park pretty much stretches the entire length and then some of these two specific areas. Like many major cities, London police have experienced a lot of understaffing. Is it possible there are clues to be found? I live extremely close to this area, and I can tell you I will be going for hikes in Kiwanis as the weather turns to spring, and I'm going to be keeping my eye out for sure. Now, I'm not in law enforcement, but the more eyes that can be set on this awful disappearance, the better. Please help find Gonzalo Ruby. Seven people. 7 people listed as missing by police in London, Ontario. How is it possible they have just disappeared? Each case seemingly involves foul play. This is the kind of stuff that gives me nightmares and anxiety. Many of these people have gone missing in the east end of the city, where, as I've mentioned many times, is the neighborhood I've made home. It's never had a great rap, mind you. I've never had any issues living here. My neighbors are friendly, and people mostly keep to themselves. London's East End has been labeled as rough, dangerous, low income, you name it. The band Bob Notchus actually released a song about the East End called EOA. If you are or ever have been a Londoner, you know that means east of Adelaide. Check out the lyrics for that song or give it a listen. It should tell you all you need to know about the perception people have of the East Enders. But it's the little things I've started doing since I moved here that keep me safe. I always carry a cell phone, even if I'm just walking my dog and don't really need it. The reason that's something I always make sure to have? Well, here's a little story for you. A few years ago, I was taking my dog and my infant son for a walk, and the minute I left my complex, I heard screaming. A woman and man were fighting in the townhouses across the street, and they were throwing clothes and household objects around. She started screaming at me that he took her cell phone and he was beating her and for me to call police. I called police to report it and tried to get her to cross the street and stay with me. She didn't, so I could do nothing else but continue my walk. It wasn't a situation I wanted my infant to be part of anyway. I was nearly home again when the female ran out of that same house screaming that the male had just punched her in the face. I yelled at her for her to come across the street immediately, and she had blood on her chin and kept saying, "Help me, he just busted out my fucking tooth," while pulling down her bottom lip to show me that yes, she was in fact missing a tooth and there was definitely blood coming out of the spot where it once was. I kept yelling for her to stay with me, and I again called the police saying it had escalated and they needed to get to us immediately. They did arrive, took my information, and took the male into custody. Later that day, the police showed up at my house to take my statement. That's just one thing I've experienced here. It isn't often we go a day without hearing sirens wailing. Police briefs I read tell the tales of countless shootings, murders, gun and weapon seizures, all just steps away from my home. The funny thing is, though, I actually feel safer in this neighborhood than I did in other areas of the city, and I've lived all over this city. I've lived in the Westmount neighborhood, which is kind of well-to-do. I've lived in White Oaks. I've lived downtown. You name it. Old South. Some of these areas, even though they're labeled as better areas, I've actually had more scary times there than I have in the East End. Things like this can happen anywhere, and I think that's the point that I'm trying to make here. It's important to be diligent and aware of your surroundings at all times. And always trust your gut. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. If I can leave you with a final piece of advice, keep your eyes and ears open, always. Okay, that's going to do it for today's episode of Crime Squad Podcast. Thank you, as always, for listening. Join the squad. Follow the podcast wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss any episode releases. Follow my social media accounts. If you have a suggestion for a case for me to cover, feel free to send me a direct message or email me at crimesquadpodcast@gmail.com. I answer every email that I receive, and lately I've been receiving quite a few, so I want to thank those of you who have reached out. And of course, as always, never forget to stay safe and be kind to each other.